Hello, everybody. How are you doing? I'm welcoming you back to another On The Settee. So I wanted to welcome you not only to the settee, but also into the front room, which is the beginnings of an ambitious long-term neighbourhood project. And it's a platform in Birmingham to be designed, grown and co-owned by local communities. For those of us who might be joining for the first time, welcome, hello. I'd like to give you some insight into what On The Settee is. So in the front room, the settee offers a space of sanctuary, a place where you can take a load off. And on our settee, you'll discover conversations that will slot into your day, like a catch up with an old friend or your favorite song or something that makes you feel at home, open yet vulnerable and connected with yourself and others. This next chapter of On The Settee brings together intersectional practitioners that are shaking up the field within which they work, not only through what they do, but also by authentically being who they are. Expanding upon the personal conversations with artists earlier this year, we looked at the internal everyday experience of the pandemic through the lens of their creative practice. This series looks more at the external, at the wide environmental, social and cultural factors at play as we navigate the next stages of COVID-19 together. In this series, spend time with those moving between a range of different spaces across different facets of their identity and the interconnected purposes of their work that takes us beyond any one compartmentalised reality and into the realms of possibility. So I'm your host, Danni and Suriya, also known as Zaz, and today I'll be talking to Suriya Aisha, an artist, activist and producer. So firstly, just to let you know, the talk is open for the Q&A, so please feel free to drop your questions in throughout, whether that's with us on Zoom or on YouTube. So yeah, let's get started. Firstly, hi Suriya, come on. If you could just give us a little bit of a wave and tell us a little bit about yourself, that would be amazing.
Hey Zaz, I need you to be able to enable me to show my face, so start my video.
Minute, let me just get that sorted out for you. Hold on. Hi there, our tech host. Is it possible for you to enable Suriya's video? Amazing. Hello, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm really happy to be here with you.
So good to see your face. So yeah, my first kind of thing was just a little bit of an intro, like who are you? How are you doing? And a wave and a hello. Whoa.
So much. Who am I? It's the existential question of the moment, isn't it? It's like, who are we right now? But no, I am so you said my name. My name's Suriya. I'm an artist and a community builder, maker, and also because it's weird, that word activist, isn't it? It's like, who gives us that word? Do we take it ourselves? Yeah. So I'm still figuring out that label for myself. But yeah, I would say that I'm an artist and someone who loves gathering people in various ways, whether that's through producing or artistic practice.
Amazing. I've got lots to ask you about all the things you just mentioned, so it's amazing. I really like that you've already said about the activism thing, like who actually gives us that title, like what does that mean? Yeah. And also what does it mean in the context of like, of now, of today? Yeah, more things to break into in a little bit. So as like, you know, and for everyone who's like here with us in Zoom or on YouTube, or people that are gonna like catch up with this later, this series is really about talking to people who, you know, through their work, through themselves, through their practice, is looking at that kind of like wider social, environmental and cultural kind of factors at play, especially, you know, how we are looking at that and how we navigate that through COVID, right? And whatever that even means, the different layers of how COVID has affected lots of people, it's affected our systems that we work in and all of these areas of our lives. So I just wanted to kind of outline some of the areas that I really wanted to touch on with you today, and kind of, yeah, because the breadth of what you do touches on a lot of different areas. It's a very kind of like wide spectrum of things that kind of interconnect. And I think when I was like thinking about what this series of On The Settee was going to be, it was very much like, okay, when I was thinking about like what I even wanted to touch on with you, I was like, okay, so there's a bit of this thing of personal practice, around invisible disabilities, but also your background in the arts, how you have been part of and created spaces for queer people of colour and queer youth as well. And there's all of these like things that are kind of at play, and how does activism even tie into that? Like, what does that look like? So like I said, so many areas to cover. So I guess let's go. So my first kind of question is about your personal practice and a little bit about your background. And I wanted to kind of start with maybe like even just like a vague timeline of, of how you've got to where you are now. So and obviously correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like you kind of really started in theatre, and you know, how did that kind of inform and form where you are now, kind of creating solo work, to even being involved with youth work, and then navigating all three and kind of looking at invisible disabilities. What does that timeline even look like? What is that?
You invited me to This Is Your Life, Saz. Are you making me do This Is Your Life secretly?
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, no, to be honest, it's good. It's good to reflect on where did you start? You know, I do ask myself that question often. How did I get here? Why? What am I doing? Why am I doing this? And so it started for me really. I studied psychology at uni, and I originally wanted to study psychology and theatre, but my mum, with her very Jamaican ideology ways, was like, no, because it's not a certain uni, so you're gonna have to do straight psychology. So I did psychology and sociology. So I've always loved theatre. I grew up doing theatre and art and all those kind of things. But I studied psychology with the view that after I'd graduated in that, I would always match it with artistic practice, with the idea that I would use arts as a form of a transformational tool with specifically young people and children. And so I guess like I'm not too far away from that now. I think that's really where my work does intersect, even though I am an artist and I do like to create art as is, but also for me, it's about how can this be used as a tool, as a transformative practice that we enable people to be more of themselves and be more in themselves in that moment as well. So after I graduated uni, I think it was like Amira's an amazing poet and works at Beat Freaks, who said to me, why don't you do this thing at the Rep? And I was like, I'm not a theatre person. That's not me. I don't know if that's something that I want to do. But I did. I applied. I got it. And at the time, I'd always written poetry and spoken word. So much as a hobby, it wasn't really anything that I saw as a thing that I would pursue professionally. So I kind of applied to the Rep, became a theatre maker on their Foundry program, and it kind of grew from there really in terms of my artistic practice. But also at the same time of in that space, I was facilitating workshops, and I was using my passion for theatre and all those things to facilitate workshops, using the tools and techniques and the games that we do to a lot of the time create spaces for vulnerable young people. So I've worked with like youth offenders, young people with autism, and using those creative techniques in that way. And to now, I think also throughout that time, I think what's important is that, you know, we've been queer from day in it. We've been queer from when we popped out. But you know, at uni, I was the head of the Christian Union Society. That's that. I don't know, you know. so that,
I'm not shocked, because this is also just another thing. But this tying in situation, I feel like it's so much of a story, even like culturally as well. I would say just as like queer people, but culturally, like Christianity really plays like a certain type of role in your life growing up as well. So yeah.
This is it. So I think even though my parents weren't devout Christians, but you know, it was always kind of a cultural thing coming from a Jamaican background that you kind of have Christianity that underlies. And I kind of went through what I would now describe as a period of like not self-hate, but trying to grow myself out, like Jesus my way out of being gay, basically. So I only really came out again when I was about 22. And I think in that moment, I started to explore spaces that would enable me to do that. So I went to a film screening, and after a film screening, I worked with the person who'd created this film to create a space where we talked about our identities. And I just felt like so alive in that moment. So many people were like, we need this space again. And so I was like, boom, let's do it. So Unmuted grew from there. And I think also it was a desire kind of, I think some people cringe about autobiographical moments, but for me, it was like, I needed that as well in Birmingham specifically, where there wasn't that space. So that's where Unmuted Brum kind of grew out of there, because a lot of people, especially queer people of color, feel that I've got to go to London, I've got to go to somewhere else in order to do that. And I think it has such a detrimental effect on our mental health, our isolation, all those things.
Absolutely.
So creating that community was really...
Absolutely. And even we'll talk a little bit about proximity as well, but I really like that point that you've made. Like this, sometimes it feels like this this desirable need almost to move out of the city to become or allow yourself to be who you are. And I think actually Unmuted, which we'll go into a little bit as well, will really created a space that, because I was kind of off at uni and living in Leicester and whatever, and then kind of came back to Birmingham. And I definitely felt that when I came back, one, the city had changed loads, but I was definitely like, oh, I'm queer, man, cool. And I know that Unmuted was one of those spaces that was like, oh my God, as if this just exists. Like I don't have to, there was nothing that made me feel that I had to go and seek something out. It was just like, peeps are queer, man. There's Black people that are queer, other people of colour, wow, you know. And I think, yeah, even that like existing in Brum was and still is very pivotal to how I think lots of like queer POC people feel in this city and feel like rooted in themselves as well. So yeah, I mean, I'm always going to advocate for Unmuted, because honestly, the space is just, yeah, it's a lot, and it's done a lot in it. And I think it has really stopped people from feeling that they need to move to be who they are as well.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I think Birmingham, we know, is a difficult space to navigate for community because of the infrastructure of the way it's built. It isn't, I loved what you said about the front room, it being a long-term like project to create sustained community, because I think that's what we need in Birmingham, because a lot of our infrastructure is geared towards finance and business and everything that is not about people. And also it's a big space, so it's also not really geared, that connection is very difficult. Like one of the difficulties we had with Unmuted was Pauline's laughing at Jesus my way out. One of the difficulties we had with Unmuted was that people weren't even be able to get to the city centre. It would cost so much money for them to get there. So that's still a challenge that we face now.
Yeah.
But I think that is also why people sometimes feel really disconnected and isolated in Birmingham with being queer, and also that there isn't necessarily a queer scene there that isn't about alcohol and you know, that kind of white cis men gay ideology about what it means to be queer. So yeah, so I created Unmuted, and that kind of grew, and everything that's happened has kind of been organic, really. I think after that, I just knew I go where I feel alive, basically, and that's what I feel like has really guided the way that I work. So I feel really empowered and alive with young people. I think it's so important that they have varied role models. And I know that feels like a cliche phrase, but I feel like we can't underestimate the power of youth work. And I think 100%. Nowadays we're seeing, do you know what I mean, the real power of needed of community. And so yeah, so that's grown into me being now co-director of Colours Youth Network, which works with younger queer people of color, because that was also a need that it highlighted, was that we had a lot of young people who were very vulnerable coming to the space, and it was like, okay, there needs to be something separate for this, because they need more in kind of focused support. And then with Sick Babe, which is the platform that I'm creating for women and non-binary, well, it's women and non-binary focused for people living with invisible disabilities. That kind of grew about me growing into my identity as a disabled person, really. And again, probably needing the space myself, or also what it was about was me as an artist, learning, wanting to be an artist, wanting to write more, wanting to perform more, and realizing that actually the arts is built in a very inaccessible way, which focuses on burnout and focuses on like, you know, late nights, early mornings, all hours of the day. And I just, it was physically impossible for me to participate in that world. So Sick Babe and the wider project Horizontal that I'm working on is kind of an ongoing research project of investigation about how do people with invisible disabilities exist in the arts and otherwise, to be their full selves. How do we unpick ableism in these spaces? How do we unpick all of these ideologies that have influenced the way that we think about disabled and sick people?
Absolutely. And I think a big thing is actually when we're looking at these kind of areas where you know, you see that something isn't there. So for instance, by, you know, people from it being highlighted within Unmuted, that actually there's a lot of like younger, vulnerable queer people, or even if they're not vulnerable, but just a certain level of like queer people of a certain age. And actually, you know, it doesn't, sorry, it does mean that other spaces have to exist, right? And almost doing that on the back of listening to the community, and the community saying, this is, you know, where kind of these pockets are. I think it also comes from a different place as well, because I think there can be these areas where you have like focus groups because something's happening and that's why the focus group exists. Whereas if you are already part of a movement, part of something that you feel connected in as a family almost, those things come out naturally, right? And then it makes sense for them to happen, rather than being like, oh, let's just speak to queer people in Birmingham and figure out what needs to be done. But actually, like, you know, our community is saying this thing. And when you kind of start to look at what those structures also look like why isn't there more youth provisions anyway? You know, we start to kind of question all of these other bigger things that are not just kind of rooted in you know, the kind of the acknowledgement that something doesn't exist, but actually we're asking why does that not exist? And when you start to do that, that's how you then start to say, yo, things are just really ableist, right? Like we just live in a very ableist society. And actually it's something that me and Kavita touched upon last week on the Settee, that actually there's so much about society that is so ableist that then it can get wrapped up in a way that stops looking at the ableism in it. So if you think about sustainability and then everyone's like, I need to get a metal straw, not acknowledging why plastic bendy straws exist, right? And also not acknowledging that there might be a reason other than it just being for consumption of more products to buy, or so you could just, do you know what I mean? It's really about that. So I'm really interested in what you said when you said about with Sick Babe podcast, how that's something that's kind of not just the podcast, sorry, but the research within itself, how that was also you creating space for yourself. So my other kind of question is, when we're in these spaces where we're allowed to acknowledge, analyze, understand, how are those spaces born in a way that like allows other people to be part of that as well? So how, for instance, with Sick Babe, have you been able to get people involved with that? And also looking at that through a non-ableistic lens as well, right? How did you make people feel comfortable to want to like kind of add to that and create that space?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm always what I'm learning more in my life is that I'm in it for the slow game. So for me, it's all about relational practice. How do you build compassionate relationships with people in your community in order that you have long-term sustained relationship with these people? It's not just, oh, we need you for this project, can we whatever. It's like, I want, you know, the community of Unmuted is, I'd rather that it be medium size but people have stayed connected with each other for 6, 7, 10 years, 20 years, rather than we do book and then it's big and then it's gone. So I think for me as well with Sick Babe, it's about creating a space where I'm hearing people and I'm seeing people and I'm really saying in what ways do we really like center our needs, not just kind of in a tick box development phase with Sick Babe. And we all literally just like asked for a flat in the rep which had a bed in it, and we like lay on the bed and eat hummus and chat about things, and we wrote that down and we recorded bits and bobs. And it was like, because that was the way that people's needs are actually centered in that moment, as opposed to kind of taking like a spreadsheet that we've downloaded offline to say, this is what disabled people want and need, so that's what we're going to do for them. So I think it's always being curious and open to really trying to see and hear people. And I think so, and that's generally what I'm trying to do, where it's like, I never want to own anything. I think that's why I'm thinking about the word activist and leader. It's like, it's not, you can't really own a community or even really lead a community. You're kind of just within the community, and you might be offering it direction, and everyone in that community offers something different. So my offering to that community might be structure and an organization, but it wouldn't be the community without each and every one of them. And I think we are in a phase where we are seeing the tension at the moment, especially in Black Lives Matter and lockdown, between like celebrity culture. And I don't mean that in terms of like peak celebrity culture. I mean also influencer culture, also Instagram culture, and community. And people are realizing now, oh, community is quite a good thing, actually. Do you know what I mean? It's important. I miss community, I miss people. But we kind of grew into this space of idolizing the few, and actually not thinking about who is in the place which creates the small moments. And you see that even throughout history. If you think about like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, you know, there was lots of Black women specifically behind them doing all the everything, food, everything, community, organizing. We don't know their names and we have to seek out their names now. But it is like questioning, how do we make sure that that doesn't re-happen in this moment, that we're not just holding up the one and not giving voice to the rest, and actually saying, oh, you're only valuable because you speak loud and you're there all the time. And actually that's also an ableist principle, isn't it? Because there is an idea that to be an activist is to take your body to the streets. And actually for a lot of sick and disabled people, they're not going to do that. Do you know what I mean? And actually I'm like, take my body to my bed and speak. That's what I might do.
Yeah.
Take my body, you know what I mean? What can I do lying down? That's my often question.
Yeah, no, I get it. And also like, it's so much of, okay. So going back to this activism point, there's something really interesting that I think has come out really through 2020. The fact that lots of people still felt like they wanted to go out and protest and be on the streets, etc. However, there was just so many people that didn't feel comfortable with that or weren't able to do that, partly, you know, because maybe they're at higher risk or whatever, lots of different kind of things. And also people just being like, I'm not leaving my house. So there's that. And I think this year, there was really just like this moment of people actually thinking about all the other ways that people live, right? So if someone said, actually, I'm personally not going out to protest, like I'm at risk or whatever, fine. But then suddenly people were finding out more things that they could do while being at home and actually tying into their activism. Whereas, like you said, lots of like sick or disabled people have been doing this and it's such a normal part of like their lives, but it's not normalized throughout society. And that's the tea, because how can we kind of continue in that way, right? To kind of keep saying, well, if you're not this personality type, then you can't be in this like leadership role, and whatever leadership means to people. If you don't write to this standard, you can't be a leader. If you don't speak in this way, you can't be a leader. There's so many kind of like blockades that I think that we do put up, but actually throughout this year, lots of those are being knocked down more. And I think it's being knocked down because the people who experience their lives in a way that isn't normalized to everyone else are actually able to be like, look, I am literally here. This is my life. I live like this. This is what I do.
This is it. You know, as I was going to say, you know, one of the biggest things for me as my activism on a day-to-day is undoing the shame that I've internalized about my identity. And obviously, like, I sit at all the intersections, like intersection bingo, do you know what I mean? In terms of like being a Black disabled woman, queer. So for me, a lot of the time, it's like in my everyday life, looking through my world and saying, in what areas of my life is that being influenced by shame, or influenced by something that someone has told me about how I need to be? So for me, in the say, for example, take the Black Lives Matter protest that happened throughout lockdown. I wasn't gonna go there, and for the first time I publicly spoke. Actually, I think I did it through Unmuted to say, I think I put the status I think I said was that our advice would not to go. And that was quite controversial and challenging for me to do, because that was my feeling that I had. And then also kind of questioning, was that the wrong thing to do? Am I being like over the top or shaming myself for that feeling? But then on my personal page, then went and shared that actually I was staying home, and I was really, and actually still felt, even, you know, I think it's also about allowing duality. I was passionate and worried about people going, but also I was proud and happy that people were making themselves heard. And then also I was saying to myself, I'm going to be open and honest with how I'm protesting, which was like, I put a picture up in my window and went deeper in with my self-care and held space for other Black young people to be in that moment. That was my form of protest in that moment. And my form of protest was also like maintaining my relationship and all these different beautiful things that actually are part of my activism or part of me. Because if I don't have these foundations around me, because also there's something that Nim Ralph shared. Nim Ralph is an amazing activist and speaker and a facilitator. You can find them on Twitter. And they spoke about the cycle of campaigning and activism. And often you see when something really stark happens, what you'll notice, and you'll start to pick up on it more, is you'll see a real surge in people, and there'll be like people who've never spoke before, whose emotions are moved, which is a great thing. And you have a surge of voices at one time, which is needed in the cycle. But if you don't have a direction and what you have demands for that campaign, it will fizzle out and you'll go back around into that cycle. And those of us who've maybe been organizing or being active for a longer time, often in those moments, it's a real challenge and stress, because you're like, should I be doing that? Should I be going on the streets? But then it's like, I've been organizing for years. It's not like I'm saying that in a conceited way, but in a way that I'm like, you have to remind yourself that who's going to be here when the hashtags stop, when everybody deletes their black square and we go back and whatever, and who's going to be here when the young people who were connected for that 1 week are not connected anymore. Do you know what I mean? Who's going to be there after the surge has happened? And I think that's what I try and hold dear to myself, of being like, the slow and steady is important, and being open and honest about who you really are is important. And that includes your disability, that includes your choices that you make to protect your body and your mental health, which I think have been shamed subtly, even if we don't realize it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think if someone says that, if someone really shares with you like the things that their like body goes through, and whether that's like a long-term or a chronic health issue, I definitely think people can have their first reaction, their knee-jerk reaction, is to think it's not as bad as that person is telling you. And that really does come through this kind of like way that, like, that society's kind of taught us to almost think about something, because actually so much of the rhetoric is about kind of, you work really hard, you know, if you work really hard you'll get rewarded really well. I'm not going to go into that much. However, it's ridiculous, right? Because of certain people's backgrounds, because of certain blockers and obstacles that we have in society, structural, institutional racism, homophobia, just queerphobia, transphobia, all the phobias, all the isms. So many people can try as hard as they can, but it will not be to the point that society is ready to open that door, right? So I think even with that, there is this thing where there's this mistrust of people being honest about their pain, or honest about their bodies not being able to do things, right? Like, I think there's a mistrust because someone will say, well, I just don't think you're working hard enough, or I just don't think you're doing this, or have you tried this exercise? Have you tried this? And almost like forgetting that that person actually knows their body and themselves better than you ever will. And I think sometimes that type of conversation, that type of mindset really sets up these blockers, right? To normalizing the fact that people's bodies, people's brains, people's everything's work very differently to each other's. And we kind of have can have this mentality where it's like, if you're not hitting these certain things, then are you valuable? And I think when we start to question people's value based on their body, based on their mind, based on what they can and can't do, or what they do amazingly, or whatever, it really starts to kind of take away what someone can feel about themselves. Yes, obviously, but it takes away like the vast difference in the world as well. Like, and it kind of says, if you're not like this, then whatever. But I personally don't want to live in a world where everyone is like the same. To be honest, like, I don't like, I think it would be very, very strange.
It would be so strange. It would be like, it was Animal Crossing.
Please.
I mean, even Animal Crossing have very,
even Animal Crossing are doing up, like, people have got different objectives and thoughts about things, man. Some people love the gym, some people are just really trying to get that new outfit. Do you know what I mean? Some people want to go out for a swim. Like, it's just too much.
Even Animal Crossing got it better than, you know what it is as well, as it's like, in terms of sickness, it's like there is no space in terms of the ideology that society has created for us about being unwell. There is a very small space for people with chronic illness, because we live in a binary, again, binaries, you know, this society of binaries of sickness and wellness. So it's like, even you're seeing now in the conversation around COVID-19, people are like, oh, you might not just get well again, it might be a long thing. And it's a really difficult, weird space to be like, as a chronic ill person, seeing that it's like, yes, people are ill for all of their life, and it's not something that they can ever, it's not going to go away. Like, and it's a hard thing to even ingest as someone with a chronic illness. It's like, oh, like, because we're taught so much about, you go from this to that, and then you go from this to that, you know what I mean? You get the grades, and then you get the job, and you do this, and then it's like a tick box. It's like Lego, it can always fit into a bit. Whereas actually what we're hearing more, especially with chronically ill people, is that I exist in that space in the middle. Like, do you know, I exist in that space, and I'm never going to be well again.
Yeah.
But and I have to figure out how to learn to celebrate that in a way that feels like such an oxymoron, because actually, when do we ever see, well, we do now, but when we were growing up, we wouldn't see people being like, I'm sick and I'm still amazing. Do you know what I mean? And or the narrative around sickness, even on in the mainstream media, it's still about overcoming your pain, overcoming your sickness. And if you haven't overcome it, then you're a failure. So you hear the language around cancer often is like fighting cancer and lost their battle with cancer. And it's like, no one loses or wins an illness. You just live or you don't live. Do you know what I mean? And even then, when you live, you're probably still living with complications and pain and all these different things. So I think we have to expand that idea of how people's bodies exist. And the fact is, like, all of us will probably experience sickness at some point of our life. So you see, even now with the conversation around the free school meals, people are like, just work your way out of whatever. It's like people are so have that arrogance around their own body where they're like, I'm never going to get sick and lose my job. I'm always going to be well. And it's like, you literally don't know at all anything that could happen. And sickness is one of the things that really does influence, whether that's mental health or physical health, influences poverty in people's life or their low income. So I think it's all connected, because capitalism is all about exchanging your body for labor, isn't it? And if you are saying, I want to exchange something else, or I'm not going to engage in that,
yeah,
you can feel isolated.
yeah.
So,
and it's like, if you decide to sleep regularly and rest regularly, even that is like such a, like, you know, that's
radical.
It's radical. To rest is radical. Like, do you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
like you were saying about kind of people's bodies, like, you know, we don't know what could happen at the end of the day. We don't know, but almost the quantifying of, like, yeah, the quantifying of like you being valuable as really rooted so much in your body and your wellness. And actually it kind of just, I can't imagine what that constant feeling of, like, because I kind of, you know, vaguely just remember, like, you know, growing up, people would make comments, right, about maybe someone who had a disability, or, oh, I don't know how they cope with that, or, oh God, I couldn't cope with that. And it's just kind of like, you do realize you're actually speaking about someone's life. And within that, you are almost shaming, not almost, but you're shaming this person and putting this narrative on that person. Which actually, it's just like, so many people are like sick or have disabilities or whatever, but that doesn't mean that they can't just like still be dope in whatever that is, and acknowledge, yeah, this is the capabilities of my body, and that's what I can do, and that is actually good enough. That is fine. That is okay.
Yeah.
And I think when lots of people who actually stand up for that and advocate that, let's say on social media, you like, there's so much support, of course, but the people that aren't supporting it is such a backlash. It's almost like you shouldn't feel confident in who you are. It's almost that. It's like you shouldn't feel as good as you do. And I think that in itself is already something that stops so many people from even just seeing some of their potential, part of their potential, exploring what could be, because people have shut that down for so long and from so early.
Yeah, and I think sometimes you don't even know that you shut it down. I think Pauline just mentioned in the chat about how using aids that make your, you know, for someone who potentially might have invisible disability, when you use a particular aid, so that crutches or use your wheelchair or those kind of things, you become visible. And then you might, there's a lot of the time these comments come from sometimes inside your family or friends of being like, you don't need that, or, you know, it's seen as like either the only way that disabled people are often seen is pitied or inspiration porn. Like, so it's like, oh, you're so inspiring. It's like, I'm literally just walking down the street. You know what I mean? I'm literally just making a cup of coffee.
Just to keep a bead here.
You know what I mean? Like, you're just inspiring me, because it's like, if that ever happened to me, I wouldn't be able to cope. And it's like, we still have this very Victorian mentality about disability, and how it's like, you know, think some people have ingested that idea of the curse or the this, or, you know, you're not like trying hard enough, or your family, you know, I think Pauline's saying about something about your family, a reflection on your family. Like, and I think even though we don't know the root of that, because some of that we think, how does that even make sense? Why would it be reflection on your family? But if you think about some of these old school ideologies of Victorian times, or even certain ideologies that we have in African continents and our culture back home, some of it was about, God has punished you and the family, you've got some sort of disability, or, you know, you've got some sort of curse on you, or whatever it might be, or you're to be discarded or to be taken away before you're even born, or all of those conversations that people still have now about whether to allow people to live or die. And you feel that in the everyday experience of like people thinking, why would I make space for you? You're just being too much. Do you know what I mean? You're just being too much. You shouldn't even be here anyway. So the fact that we're letting you live and breathe and be alive, you should be grateful for that. You feel it, even if people don't say it. And even if they don't know that's what they're projecting, that's what a lot of the time they're projecting. And sometimes we project that onto ourselves as well.
Yeah, like, of course. And it's like a whole process of like sometimes unlearning those narratives that we have about ourselves, or whether that's people creating those narratives for us or us creating those narratives for ourselves because of whatever. It's a whole process. There's so many different kind of like nuggets and angles to kind of really pull away from. It's not just this monolithic way in it of thinking and feeling. Like it's a lot. It really is a lot. And I think when we do move into spaces that are created with all of this kind of in mind, that space almost becomes something different in the way that like it hasn't existed, if that makes sense. Like it's like it doesn't have any rules or restrictions of or whatever. It's just this space where you're like, oh, I can be and feel myself, whatever that may be. Do you know what I mean? And no one's questioning anything really, or saying, oh, how come you've got that? Or what's this about? It's just like you just come as you are and you meet and look like other people. You share some connections. Maybe you don't share connections. Maybe it's also a space where you're learning too. Do you know what I mean? And I think when we're able to be part of those, sorry, you go.
No, I was just going to say, I think also in those spaces, sometimes you don't know that you've been holding your shoulders up. You don't know that you've been holding yourself small because, you know, and that's what space is. Yeah. That's what I really love about creating spaces where you center a particular people's needs, because you're like, you probably didn't even know that you needed this. You know what I mean? And now you've got it, and you're like, you don't even know that you're silencing that part of yourself. You don't even know that you're clenching that up, or you don't even know that you're not letting that self be free. You are just holding yourself small, and you need space to expand. Even if you, for example, go into a space again where you have to be small, because that's a lot of the time for marginalized people. We have to do that to survive a lot of the time. But you need those spaces where you can expand in order to breathe in and fill up all of you, and then you can, at least you're filled with breath to go out into the world. Whereas a lot of the time, a lot of people are living their whole life like this, and they don't even know that. Yeah,
very true. Because sometimes until you've experienced or see something that like, sometimes unless you're in a space where you've actually are able to see, I think, different experiences as well, and different people and how people like interact with you and whatever, until you've kind of sometimes felt held in a way, like, and I don't mean that in a sense of like even like a codependent way, but just being held and it holding space, holding time, holding whatever, until someone kind of like takes some of that weight, or the weight is shared. You're just like, oh, I didn't realize that I was carrying, like things were so heavy. And kind of speaking about this, about spaces where you can express and feel who you are, I really wanted to actually speak a little bit about Ballroom. I want to speak about Ball because...
Yes, of course. We have to do that.
I put this down on my list, and I was like, oh yeah, like, because I guess for like transparency and understanding, the reason that like it wasn't an immediate thing for me to put on the list is because I'm part of that scene. So sometimes, you know, you're in a thing, you've experienced it as, you know, as your people, it's your family, it's whatever. You don't almost like see that as sometimes like as monumental as it actually is. So before I go into it, firstly, just to remind everyone on Zoom and on YouTube that we're going to be doing a Q&A, so drop your questions in, be amazing. So tiny bit about, I guess, some of the connections, and this actually I think will be a good place to connect a little bit of what you do in Manchester and in Birmingham, how that proximity, even though you don't live in Birmingham anymore, the proximity to your home city is still very much like tied into kind of like what you do. So Okay, so let's start with House of Bab. I think that's a great place to start.
Yeah, I feel emotional. I don't know why I feel emotional.
Yeah, same. I'm a bit like, oh God. It feels like it's the first on the record thing, if that makes sense. I think that's why we feel a bit emotional about it. On the record.
I think it's because you know what it is, Zaz, on a real level. Let's keep it real. You know, we from Birmingham, we work in Birmingham. Birmingham ain't easy to stick with. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Not because it's not because of the people, because the people are like the best, you know, let's just say best in the UK, but straight up. I live in Miami and I still say that. Do you know what I mean? But the fact is, it's like, you have to be like, I'm committed to change here. I'm committed to making spaces, and I will not allow people to be left behind or think that they're less than they are. Like, you can't, we just can't have it. Do you know what I mean? We just can't have it. You have to have space where people feel like, let's thrive. Let's be more than just surviving. Let's live. Like, do you understand what I mean? So I think with Ballroom, it's such a subtle form of activism, and I don't think people realize it, because I think seeing you, seeing Sim, seeing Jay, seeing Nathan, seeing Tony all grow into themselves more, it starts with us, innit? You know what I mean? As QTIPOC people, if I can be all of myself in my bedroom, expand and be bright and say, I'm going to be all parts of my gender identity and my expression and my movement, as clumsy as it may be, but I'm going to try it and do it more. Then when we go into our spaces in the boardroom, you know, from the ballroom to the boardroom, we're showing up. I can't quiet myself when I've literally just stood on stage in front of all these people. Would I have ever imagined to do that? And I think House of Bab, for me, again, is the long-term game, creating world-class, I don't want to use the word world-class, let me not use that. Because what is world-class to whose world? Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Whose world are we classing ourselves against? Real talk. But what I'm trying to say is that, you know, creating work from this city that is seen by QTIPOC people all over the world, because we've got to remember, you see things like what's happening in Nigeria right now. That's what we hold in our heart as QTIPOC people. I am over here living my best life, but my family, my cousins might be back somewhere else where they're not able to live their best life. So when I show up on the Ballroom, it isn't just about me looking pretty. It's about the fact that that picture could reach someone in Nigeria, that picture could reach someone in Jamaica and be like, oh, that's me, and I can be that, and I can be myself. And it's beyond just tokenistic representation. It's 100%. Like
it's led by us, though. That's really the difference of why that tokenistic theme doesn't come. Before we carry on, let's just give a quick background to what Ballroom is, because we're just like Ballroom and everyone
let me so Ballroom is a culture that was born in Harlem in New York, and it was born out of homeless Black gay people and trans people and queer people who would not be able to exist in these like flamboyant ways in their everyday life. A lot of them were homeless. But in the Ballroom, they would perform and play different characters. So, for example, you have executive realness, where people would come in and borrow suits or save up all their money, some of them a lot of the time doing sex work and things like that, to walk in this ball with the idea that I am great in this one moment, in this moment. And trans people, a lot of trans women, would be able, that's probably the only one of the places that they were able to just be themselves in that moment. But it was like a ball, like an amazing, elegant place, like an indulgent place that you could be, whereas the rest of your life might not be like that. So we're not necessarily in that same stark cap quality now, but it stems from that culture of, in this space, I can be that. So in order my life, I can be this. So I think people see now Ballroom because it's been popularized by Madonna, like Vogue and all that kind of stuff. But I think with House of Bab, we're definitely bringing back those roots of, you know, QTIPOC, like excellence.
100%. I'm really bringing and acknowledging the history of that movement, and actually how so much of that, yes, like we're not always in the exact same situations or as kind of historically Ballroom lots of people who are walking balls. So, and when we say walking balls, basically it's kind of like a runway. And like Soraya said, you have different kind of categories, and you basically can take on that persona, you take on that category. And I think what that space offered in terms of solace, family, these almost like connections that kind of come from a different place when it's your chosen family. I think there were so many people who were like, in the early years of Ballroom developing, who didn't have family members, who were not kind of accepted within wider elements of society. And I think actually House of Bab being like Birmingham's like first kind of house, and so I keep saying these things, and I'm like, I need to actually say what that is.
Yeah, I thought about that as well.
So a house in, like, there's lots of kind of different things that tie into it, but a house is ultimately, when it comes down to it, is a family, a community, and there are lots of different houses. So we have one house in Birmingham, and then there are houses all over the UK. So when we go to a ball, there's lots of different houses coming to wherever that ball is and competing, basically. But I think with Birmingham, with House of Bab, we've kind of gone through quite a process. We're nearly the first year of House of Bab being a house. And I think a lot of the things within that is, as people, we have definitely, or are definitely honing into who and what you can be. I think that's, the confidence is ridiculous, because a lot of us, have our practices outside of Ballroom, like, have our jobs, have our whatever. And, we're all lucky to be working areas that we enjoy, right? Yeah. However, the confidence that being in a house, being around kind of like queerness in that way is kind of unreal. And actually, when you said about sometimes you don't know what you've been carrying, or you don't realize that you haven't been being yourself fully, I think that's something that I have 100% experienced, especially in the house, of just being like, oh wow, I wasn't, do you know what I mean? Like, because I always think that I'm, obviously my character in it, I'm very much is very much like whatever, chatting, hyping people up, blah blah blah. But the internal work that I've been able to do and acknowledge is like kind of unreal. And I think there's a piece about that, about how we create those spaces within the queer community. And a lot of the time we can do certain things like that and go into it and see what happens, because we are very much in a lots of queer spaces, you are building what those structures look like, or not even structures, but you're building what that can be, what space can be like, how people are in that space, and if things branch off and blah blah blah. It's less of the norms, or like the heteronormative structures that exist in other areas of society. Yeah,
there's no system that we're trying to fit ourselves into. We are creating the system. And I feel like, or the model, because obviously people often talk about models in these kind of ways, but we know that how many spaces have we been in with it where a model has been designed with us in mind. So I think with House of Bab this first year has been like, what is our model? What are we about? And even when we've wanted to like do something quickly or whatever, it's been like, let's take time, because it is, like you said, I'm really passionate about all of you having the opportunity to grow that internal strength, like core confidence, like inside. Because it isn't, I think people see it and they think it's just about performance, but it's not about the performance. It is about the performance, but the performance is just like, it's like me opening the door to Zaz in their house.
Yeah.
And I should still see the same, what I see on the thing. Not necessarily, you're not going to be dressed up as black in your house. I mean, you might be.
Who knows?
Do you understand what I mean? It's like, it's the deep truth. It's, what I mean, we might go on, we might all stay walking Ballroom until we're 55, or we might not never, but I think we will all hopefully say that the Ballroom has enabled us that space where it's like we're challenging each other in love as well, isn't it? It's not just like, wow, what you do is amazing. It's like, yeah, I don't know, I think maybe we could work on this a bit more. And for you all, especially because you're producers and project managers in your own right, for me it was really important that as QTIPOC people, you had the space to be the one taken care, like being taken care of, and being like, this is what I think like you should do, or this is what I'm seeing in you, and like, let's do more of this. Because we often don't get that spaces, because we're often thrust into leadership because we're like a marginalized person and they want us there. Do you know what I mean? It's like, not all of us want to do that. Some of us want to just breeze off in the background and just enjoy life. You know what I mean?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Like, sometimes it's just like, I think what I've learned from the house is actually just going in and just being the person experiencing the thing, because I know, like, about myself, I very much go into things and I'm like, this is leadership. This is, and you pick on these things and you so it's been really interesting to even like just experience of that throughout this year. So I just wanted to talk about like some of the wider kind of connects with Manchester and Birmingham. So even within the ball scene, House of Bab is connected into a wider network. If you could maybe speak a little bit about that, but then also go into kind of the connections between Colours Youth Festival being in Manchester and Birmingham as well, and kind of what that looks like, especially in terms of proximity, and how we know that like lots of us leave the city and we can't, or for whatever reason, can't keep tying that.
That's true. So yeah, so with House of Bab is part of what we call a housing association, which is has an overall mother, and mother, the term mother and father, or it comes from this idea of the house or the home in the ballroom history, where a lot of queer Black people didn't have family, so they would, so as well as like, you know, I think some of you might have watched Pose or those kind of things, as well as the ballroom, often these people would be supporting people in general life anyway. And so House of Bab's mother is Darren Pritchard, who's a really like, yeah, just amazing like dancer, advocate in Manchester. And he has houses across Newcastle, Birmingham, Manchester, and where else was the other one? It's in Huddersfield as well.
Yeah.
So, and then I am like the custodian of that house. So deal with the everyday like encouragement and be on time and loving and all those kind of things. So Darren kind of, I guess, sets the vision for us and I help carry it out. And so I'm also part of a house in Manchester called House of Noir, where I'm like a baby there. And then I get to be like a little bit more leader. So
you get to not like necessarily be the leader there. You get to also do the experiences.
Yeah, I get to do what you do. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. Which is really important for me to expand my creativity in that way. So yeah, so that connection is really important to me, because I don't know what it was, but when I lived in Birmingham, I just never really thought about learning from the ways other cities were doing things. I think for some reason, I just thought about, I think in Birmingham, we often can fall into that trap of like comparing ourselves to London, or London comparing themselves to us. So I don't know, there's that kind of weird thing of like being the second city. But I've really loved in moving to Manchester and kind of getting into the world here. And I do, you know, I think some people say I'm based in two cities, but I do feel like what I think about and see in Manchester, I think about Birmingham and how that relates, and try and stay in touch. So I'm still on the board of like Beat Freaks, which is a youth organization, and obviously having House of Bab, it was really important for me to still have projects and connections that were actively taking part in the city. So it wasn't like this thing of, oh, nostalgia about Birmingham, but actually thinking about what's actually happening there. And I think it is important that we think about, especially for these non-London cities, which I don't know what people call them, like regional cities, whatever it is.
We're regional.
Well, this is it. We think about the connections between those cities, because often we are like, oh, who are we in comparison to London? Or who are we in comparison? You know, Manchester is often referred to sometimes as the London of the North. And it's like, why do we need to do that? Let's just think about, exactly. But I think what's, this is it. But what's powerful is like, okay, so how can the alliances happen between Birmingham, Manchester, Leicester, Nottingham, you know, all those kind of things of connecting and understanding these different infrastructures of cities and what it means to be British in those cities and those kind of things. So with Colours, that's also a big part, an important part for queer young people as well, because it's like you're based in Manchester or you're based in Birmingham, or you're based in London, or, you know, hopefully we're going to expand to Scotland and Wales and in the future. It's about, even if you don't necessarily have lots of people in the city, you know that you're part of a network which makes you feel connected regardless. And so hopefully that it like expands your world as well, to the idea that you can be and exist anywhere, because you can see someone else in Wales being a you, or do you know what I mean? You can see someone else in Scotland being a QTIPOC person. So I think that's really important, that we create this national conversation, so that areas of people don't get missed out, and we also have a genuine idea of different types of people and how they exist in different spaces.
100%.
And just learning and listening to people in that sense, I think that's just something that I really enjoy to do.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, I think you made a really good point about the comparison of Birmingham and London, and it's kind of like always this comparison to London, which is really like doesn't actually make any sense, because if you think about how many people live in Birmingham, how many people live in London, and just the space, there's so much difference, right? But actually, there's really something important when we are looking at like our like neighbouring cities, right? Like, what are people doing here? Like, what's happening in Nottingham? What's happening? Do you know what I mean? Even like the Midlands as a whole, like, and what I kind of find more interesting and more important actually is, how are we making people that live here, whether that's young people, whether it's queer people, how are we making people who live here have that like understanding of ownership of place, and like feel that like this city is actually for me, and not that it's somewhere to just kind of, you live for a bit and then you just go, you know, like, because and that's not just for the West Midlands, but it's also just kind of this look at how we talk about ourselves, like our smaller cities, but like also the greatness that comes out of them, right? And what does that mean? And I think even when, because we spoke yesterday, and one of the points I said to you was like this idea of like still staying like really connected to Birmingham, and you were like, yeah, you know, I could like live in LA and I'll still be like calling in and checking if everyone's fine. And I really believe that, like I feel in my heart, I feel in my heart, there's something about what that means. So yeah, so I just wanted to kind of really highlight that proximity is really like important to how we look at things, and actually to the comparison situation as well.
Yeah, and I think it's you know, I'm always very mindful of like the thing that I'm very mindful of is like, you know, making sure that I genuinely am connected to the city, and not just like talking about it in this past tense and this idea that I knew what it was. Because I do think that it's, for me, it's the way that I've made peace with it is like, you know, my well-being is all part of the game, you know, not the game, but the process, isn't it? So it's like, I in real talk, which people often underestimate, it's like my partner was in Manchester, and also I needed, for my own personal growth, to just have a new experience. And I feel like I feel more engaged with the Birmingham now than I was then, because I feel better in myself. Do you know what I mean? I'm better in myself. I'm closer to love and community, and in another way. So I think that's also a fine place to be. And I think in terms of us thinking about what is a way that we can really look inward at what Birmingham is, what is the flavor of our city, and what makes it part, and not just be like what isn't, and all these different things, because we can go in that. And even with earlier, when I said it's hard because of the way that people with the infrastructures view people in the city, not because of the people itself. I think you've got some really amazing people that have grown out of Birmingham, and there's a fierceness there that, you know, it really can't be matched in a lot of ways. So
that fierceness is there, because it's just like, no man, you're not talking about us like this forever, like I'm not. Do you know what I mean? It's almost this like of being like, nah man, like I think it's also the confidence in it, the confidence in knowing that amazing people come out of this city, knowing just like the amazing work that's happened and continues to happen. And I think there's something about really like important like youth orientated work that's happened over the years in Birmingham. Because when you look at like, you know, people who are pivotal to how we look at the city, or are pivotal in what they think and feel, loads of like those people were like part of like Can Hill Collective. For those of you who don't know, that was a like an amazing program that was based at Mac, and it was like a young people's program. Was it like 16 to
25? And it was, I just, you know what, when I think about things like that, it makes me so inspired in the work that I do now, because I always go into every workshop and every project that I do thinking, you know, even if you're tired or you're a little bit this, you go, okay, this could actually change someone's life. This program, this project, this workshop could actually be the thing that could transform someone's world. And I know, because I look back at things like Cannon Hill Collective, or look back at things like or workshops that I've been in, where it genuinely has been like, this has been something that has transformed my world. And I think we can't underestimate those moments. And I think when we celebrate the moments that we create, in terms of even what Civic Square are doing at the moment with the front room and the floating front room, which I just think just looks so lovely. And I just really want to come down so I can experience that, because it feels like such an important part that has grown out of the pandemic. Not out of the pandemic, because I know you probably all planned it before, but I just think the fact that it's existing within the pandemic, it's like, actually, I've been so inspired and excited about when people are creating local interventions, because I think we've learned more of that, isn't it, in the pandemic, where it's like, actually, I can't leave my house, but to be honest, if I knew my neighbours, I'd probably be able to chat to them in the garden. So that's made me realise, like, actually creating spaces like you're doing with the port at the Port Loop is so important, because it means people can come out and actually connect with people who are just actually local to them.
Yeah, exactly. And like those connections, because they're local, it's like something that is more likely to develop as well. Like what we've kind of found, which has just been really awesome, like because this year's just been so hard for so many people, like, you know, but what I've loved about it is going and like seeing, like, you know, like similar people or whatever, the same people like coming per weekend, but you may not see like certain people talk yet. And then that week, right, there's that next day or whatever, you just see these people start having a conversation. You're like, oh, here we go. But it's really beautiful, because actually there's something moving about that in it. And it feels like part of that timeline. So exactly like kind of like Can Hill Collective is part of the timeline of something. Like, if you don't know, like, go and check out all the people that were part of it, because that were part of it are people that are doing big things now. Do you know what I mean? And most people are still in the city, or if they're not here, they're still doing things here.
Yeah. And shout out to Dan Whitehouse, who was like such an integral part, and Amy
Martin.
Yeah, sorry, why I was forgetting Amy Martin's last name. I think it's because I was seeing their because I was thinking about Bab House or different things. But yeah, you know, all those people that were integral to fighting for that space, because that's what is important. You've got to be like, because I know that at the time, maybe Dan and Amy, we were just like little rascals around, not turning up, not replying, all these different things. But they were like fighting to be like, this is so important. And also what Dan did, what he always used to say to me was that he was really championing of the early 20s, because there was a lot of things that were like for 16 to 19-year-olds, but there wasn't at the time much for like early 20s, which is what we needed most. So I really am grateful for those spaces, and just his work and Amy's work is the reason that a lot of the reason why I'm doing this stuff now, because I know how impactful it is.
Exactly. And just to have those things added like to the timeline is wild. So I have a question from Alexia, and yeah, so it says, what reading would Suriya like to see being created to soothe, stoke imagination, and support restful experiences for herself?
What reading?
Yeah. So what reading?
Alexa, is this from Back to Brooke?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, love that. Thank you so much. I listen to audiobooks, you know. I know that's probably, no, that's still reading. I'll take that as reading, because I think that's still reading. I really want to read some Afrofuturism work, because I think that is really going to inspire me, because we're talking about imagination. So I'm hoping to get a because I'm visually impaired, like I struggle to read me with a what are they called, graphic novels of Octavia Butler. And I really feel like I'm really interested at the moment in connecting with what the ancestors have said, you know, because especially a lot of Black women's work, you know, I think in a way Black women have been, it's sometimes it's like, when are they listened to? And I think now is when people are like listening. So I think what I'm interested in is like going back to those who have written before me, and really, because I've read, you know, if you read like Angela Davis when you're a 15-year-old or a 21-year-old, it's very different from now reading it as like someone soon to be 30. You know what I mean? So it's like looking at all these key idols that I have in my life and thinking about them as me. I know that sounds strange, but in the sense of, because I think sometimes people, when I look at big activists like Angela Davis, for example, I think, how much does she feel like a big activist, or how much does she just feel like a person? You know what I mean? And I think if I look at her as another Black woman and I'm a Black woman, then I can feel what she's saying in a way that isn't just pedestaling. Do you know what I mean? I think if you try and be on a relational level again, then I feel like that can impact me more than being like, wow, like this person, obviously she's amazing, let me not get that wrong, but do you understand what I'm trying to say? I'm going to listen to a lot of that, and I'm also reading a lot of and listening to a lot of Brene Brown. Brene Brown.
I remember the first time I was told about her, which was really funny, because then I'm telling people, like, I'm like, oh, like, I'm like looking like this person, and everyone's just like, yeah, obviously. And I'm like, okay, this is because, you know, sometimes you can feel embarrassed, yeah, when you think you're like, you're doing the thing, and then other people are like, been doing it. But in those moments, I never felt embarrassed. I just thought, okay, cool, I'm definitely on the right track then. Like, if people I know are advocating for this hard, like, I'm about it. But what you were saying about Afrofuturisms, there's a artist called Natasha Rwanda. Like, honestly, she's really awesome. She did she did some work in Festival around mapping and manifestos, but she also has a like a spoken essay, and it's really awesome. I'll find that, and I'll post it on Twitter for anyone else who wants to have a look at it as well. It's really, really awesome. I think you'll enjoy that. Can you believe that it's actually 3:15?
Yes.
Right, I could just sit here and keep talking. Look, I'm literally like, I actually can't believe that.
I know, I can't believe you're chatting so much.
I'm like, wow. So I just really want to say, like, thank you so much for just coming to like this talk today on the back of another talk. Like, we stay booked, we stand, and really just like holding some of this space as well, because I think some of the things that we touched on, it's like we need to have these conversations more, or them just be like normal conversations to have, right? And I think today, especially on this dreary day outside, I don't know what it's like in Manchester, but it's raining hardcore in Birmingham.
It's raining really bad here.
Yeah, just having that like moment to like connect and talk about like not only things, not just one portion of our identity. I think sometimes like, and you know, but I personally don't feel that fussed by it, but like maybe someone looks at me and just sees me or sees the queer parts of my identity more than like, I don't know, the parts of like maybe a non-binary or me being Black or whatever. But I just feel like even this talk today just really like feeling like all those areas of identity just like being there. And I think so, like, I don't know, I feel like maybe we do have to I feel I have these conversations a lot with maybe people, I don't know, like, you know, like your best friend or whatever, or people that are in your team, but to actually even just have this conversation like publicly, like actually on this city, I'm like, like, it's just so beautiful. And like, just thank you so much for just bringing that today, because I feel full.
Oh, you're welcome. And thank you so much for asking me. And I was, I was looking forward to this. I was like, I just got to chat with Zaz. I've forgotten that people are watching us, which is a nice thing.
Talking, chatting about stuff. You know how we do. Yeah, so just thank you so much. Like, thank you for everyone who's joined us in the call. Like, amazing to just have you like all here with us. Like, thank you to anyone who's watching on YouTube. And also just for the people that are going to watch this back, like, thank you for back in it and saying,
hey, future people.
And it's the future beats. So yeah, thank you so much, Suriya. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to leave us with a holding screen that basically says who we're having on the settee tomorrow, which is not tomorrow, sorry, next week. Whew, I'll be tired. Which is Kai. And yeah, I'm just going to leave this with you. And yeah, thank you so much, Suriya, for just joining us. And it's been amazing. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye. See you soon.